Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. John Chisholm is Chief Executive Officer of San Francisco-based John Chisholm Ventures. He has 3 decades of experience as Silicon Valley entrepreneur, Chief Executive Officer, and investor. He founded online software companies Decisive Technology, now part of Google, also CustomerSat, now part of Confirmit. He has invested in dozens of privately held companies and mentored hundreds of entrepreneurs on 5 continents. He is president and chairman of the worldwide MIT Alumni Association, a trustee of MIT, and of the Santa Fe Institute, also a contributor to Forbes magazine. He holds bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT, also an MBA from Harvard Business School. Now, John Chisholm. Well, John Chisholm, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. So, entrepreneurship is something that you have practiced in your life, something that you've written about. A lot of people may not know exactly what that word is. In Wichita, we do know we have a proud history of entrepreneurship. Pizza Hut, White Castle, Mentholatum, a lot of companies that people know across the world were started in Wichita. And our city leaders look to entrepreneurship as one of the ways to kind of pull our Wichita economy out of the doldrums. So, what is entrepreneurship? Is it the same as small business? I think a lot of people have that misconception. I'm going to say misconception, maybe you won't, that a small business is an entrepreneur and vice versa. Is that correct or not?
Well, a small business could exist as a small business for decades. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurship is associated with startups, which means new. Mm-hmm. And so a startup is a new business. Small, and it may be small for a long time, but it's only a startup for some period of time, right. Like the first 3 to 5 years, however you want to count it.
After that, it's an established company,
yeah,
big or small.
Yeah, I do think that the Wichita town leadership's focus on entrepreneurship as a way of driving economic growth in the city is absolutely well placed, because not only do startups create new jobs, but let's not forget that no matter how small the startup is, it provides a job for the entrepreneur himself or herself.
One person.
Yeah, and as I talk about in the book, Unleash Your Inner Company, most startups fail. Mm-hmm. But the few that survive and make it big, this is where the key contribution to increased employment is for a city, for a state, or for the country. Mm-hmm. So it is absolutely well placed to focus on entrepreneurship as a driver of economic growth and jobs in a city.
And we've had people talk to us in Wichita that, you want to build an environment where you could have a Google or an Apple or Microsoft. And those, of course, are the rare, huge successes, but there are many medium-sized successes, aren't there? And it's just as worthy to try to have those, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, in this book, I'm not particularly focused on creating the next unicorn, that is, the next startup whose valuation exceeds $1 billion. I'm much more interested in empowering anyone and everyone to discover the freedom, the independence, both financial and otherwise, to do what they love through entrepreneurship.
So not everyone has the qualities of, let's say, a Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or some of the famous entrepreneurs we know about. But you mentioned earlier, before we started the show, that people have been entrepreneurs for thousands of years throughout human history.
Yes. If you go back 5,000 or 10,000 years, there were no salaries, no health benefits, no paid vacations, no 401ks. All of us were entrepreneurs. We had to be to survive. Today, there are paths that may be more attractive to some of us or many of us than entrepreneurship. But that doesn't mean that if those options weren't available today that we couldn't become entrepreneurs. I like to say I had a great advantage in becoming an entrepreneur. I was fired from my previous job. So I was pushed out of the nest and had no choice but to swim or sink. And I started swimming.
And I think a lot of people, we in Wichita, we have a very cyclical industry, the airplane manufacturing industry. And whenever we have a lot of layoffs, people say, oh, just you aircraft workers, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start a business, be an entrepreneur. Is that realistic advice for everybody? Does everybody have it in them today to be an entrepreneur, do you think?
I actually do think we do have it. It may be deeply latent, hidden, but I do think anyone who deeply aspires to can start their own business and make it a success. There are two human qualities that are important. One is passion for what you're doing, and the other is perseverance. We hear a lot about passion these days. Every business book talks about the importance of passion. That sounds easy and fun. Perseverance we don't hear as much about. That sounds like hard work. And I don't know of any other book that talks about how the two reinforce each other. Passion is an attitude. Perseverance is a behavior. And in many aspects of life, our attitudes and behaviors reinforce each other. If I deeply love something so that the hours go by like minutes, it's easy to persevere in that circumstance. That's an example of passion driving perseverance. And similarly, if I just stick with something long enough so I get good at it and start to love it, that's an example of perseverance driving passion. So you can see how the two reinforce each other.
And both are necessary, you think? Or?
I absolutely view both as necessary. Whenever you see outstanding performance in any realm of life, sports, the arts, entrepreneurship, academics, finance, you name it, executive leadership, politics, almost certainly this interplay, this positive feedback loop between passion and perseverance are at work.
Well, very interesting. We're going to take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Bob Weeks with Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, John Chisholm. So, John, on your website, I read an article where you mentioned about the Santa Fe Institute, its study of complexity in systems, human systems, economies, and things like that. You wrote, order in them emerges not from top-down command and control, but bottom-up from the interactions of large numbers of interconnected elements. Now, that kind of appeals to me because as a libertarian, one of the concepts we embrace is that of spontaneous order, that free people trading freely in markets with information will develop ordered systems. But a lot of people think, and I worry about this in Wichita, that our grasp of entrepreneurship by our government leaders and bureaucratic leaders is going to try to drive things from the top down rather than the bottom up.
That is a perennial hazard. There's an easy and ineffective way to promote entrepreneurship, and there's a hard but effective way. The easy and ineffective way is to have business plan competitions and elevator pitch competitions. I don't want to be completely dismissive of these. These are important skills for a young entrepreneur to have.
They can learn from that, I think.
Yes, but they're only a small part of the overall entrepreneurial process. The hardest part is the doing and the discovery by doing and the learning by doing, and there's no substitute for that. The real way to promote entrepreneurship in a city, in a state, or a country is to create an environment, both social and economic, that is attractive to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial activity. What does that mean? Well, in the book I talk about how Adam Smith very smartly, very presciently 250 years ago laid out the requirements for positive sum interactions, win-win situations, which is effectively applies to entrepreneurship. Protection of private property so that people are incentivized to invest in what they have, either for their own use or for a trade with someone else. Protection and respect for agreements, which of course come up in any business.
So that's the government's role in a legal system that we can use to enforce contracts.
Absolutely. Free trade, so that trade is not an obstacle to people, entrepreneurs finding customers and customers dealing with the suppliers they want.
And by free trade, you're talking about worldwide free trade, is that right?
At any level, within a city, within a state, between states, or worldwide. So what would it take to make Wichita an outstanding center for entrepreneurship? Well, what is the regulatory environment like in this city? How many obstacles are there to starting your own business, either in terms of hiring people or in terms of getting office space or getting electricity and telecom and other essential services? The World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index lays out 10 or 11 criteria. It would be interesting to take a look at those and apply them to Wichita.
That's the World Bank, you said?
World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. What are taxes like in Kansas and in Wichita? One way to create a competitive advantage is to have the most favorable tax environment. So all of these, this is as much as a city can do, and the best things a city can do, and it will take time. People use Silicon Valley as an example of success, but don't forget that Silicon Valley was started in the first half of the last century. It's almost a century old. Hewlett and Packard, which are kind of like the granddaddy company of Silicon Valley, was started in the 1930s.
Wow!
And it's grown organically, without design, and could not have been predicted, its growth path, over the last 80 or 90 years. Yeah. And this is a beautiful example of a complex system. The Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico is the world-leading research institute in complexity science. I've been privileged to be a trustee of it for the last 5 years. And a complex system is like the brain or the economy or an ecology, where no one designs it from the top down. Order emerges from the bottom up. No one could have predicted that disk drives and disk controllers and microprocessors and social networking and mobile apps would emerge out of Silicon Valley if you go back 20, 30, 50 years. This is a beautiful example of how order emerges from the bottom up. So what are obstacles to that happening? Regulations, top-down regulations. For example, minimum wage. That precludes what might be a very willing employee working for a very willing employer if they could agree on a wage. But if that wage is precluded by a minimum wage law, then that employee can't hire that employer can't hire that employee, and that employee is out of a job. So that's a win-win situation, which is lost by a regulation.
Hold on to that thought about regulation. We will take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, John Chisholm. So we were talking about regulation as perhaps being a block to entrepreneurship, and You hear a lot of people today say, the world is so complex that we have to have government manage it for us with, tens of thousands of pages of regulation, federal, state, and local. But I think that's really a paradox, isn't it? That the more complex the world is, the more difficult it is to regulate, isn't it?
Yes. In the book, I talk about two types of regulation, organic and imposed. Organic regulation emerges from the bottom up. For example, common law. Mm-hmm. Common law has emerged and evolved over centuries by whenever disputes between people arose. Common law was the resolution that seemed most reasonable, most fair to the to settle the dispute. The laws of supply and demand are another organic form of regulation.
And I think another bottom-up thing people talk about is the development of language. That just started out
absolutely.
and grew.
Yeah. Word of mouth is bottom-up. And no one, if a lot of people start talking about a new product or service and how great it is or how bad it is, that is hard to circumvent or hard to suppress. And social media only amplifies that. I like to say that even in totalitarian countries and societies, prices will still emerge because people will buy and sell things on the black market.
Yeah.
So all of that is example of organic regulation, and that's good because all of those forms of regulation evolve as societies and technologies evolve. The other form of regulation I call imposed, and this is regulation that comes from the top down. This is like statutory legislation, regulation from regulatory agencies, or executive orders. These are from the top down, and these tend to stay fixed and don't necessarily reflect how people would self-organize, and they as technology advances, it has to advance around these things, and so it tends to hold advances in quality of life and standards of living back. One of the recommendations in the book, in the Appendix E, which are policy recommendations for making the world friendlier to startups innovation, is have innovation impact assessments whenever there's a new imposed regulation being contemplated. Just as we have environmental impact assessments when there's a new real estate development, what would be the impact of regulation, proposed new regulation on innovation? Here's an example. The ubiquity of wheelchair ramps on sidewalks around the country seems very innocuous. And I do think it has a lot of advantages besides benefiting the handicapped and wheelchair bound. But what's harder to see are the downsides and the ways that the prevalence of those ramps are have negative consequences. For example, by requiring ramps everywhere, are we not disincentivizing entrepreneurs and innovators to develop smart prosthetics that would allow the wheelchair-bound to walk freely and independently without the use of a wheelchair?
Or maybe a wheelchair that could just walk up over curbs, perhaps?
Yes, as another example. So to the extent that we're not enjoying those new types of wheelchairs or new types of prosthetic devices because of ramps. The ramps are, at least on some dimensions, handicapping people who are already handicapped relative to the freedom and technology they could enjoy if those wheelchairs, if those ramps did not exist. So one small example of how, for any new regulation we're contemplating implementing, we should very deliberately think about what are its impact on new innovations and technologies. All of the regulations surrounding taxis that have been applied to Uber, that have been an obstacle to Uber, is an example. And if we had known that Uber was a possibility in the future, might we have thought differently about those regulations? Of course, it's really hard to overturn regulations because there's always some group that benefets from
And
the regulation.
entrenched economic interests.
Absolutely. In this
yeah.
case, existing
Right.
taxi companies. But do we want them holding back advances in technology and innovations that benefit everybody, as Uber has hugely proven? And the answer is, I think, no.
And I think an important area where regulation and entrepreneurship are colliding right now is in education. I'm talking K through 12, but also, I guess, university education too. We don't have much school choice here in Kansas, and whenever there's a proposal to implement charter schools or tax credit, whatever it is, the people will say, well, we'll have public money going to private schools when they have to follow the same rules that the public schools have to do. And I think a lot of those rules don't have much to do with the kids. It's more about the unions and the teachers and the administrators and so forth. That seems to be another area where regulation and entrepreneurship are at odds with each other.
Yes. The first thing that comes to my mind is those rules that public schools have to comply with are holding back the public schools themselves, much less charter schools and alternative educational systems. I mean, there are so many more efficient ways and effective ways to teach kids that we know about nowadays than the standard classroom and whiteboard or blackboard that's been around for centuries. We've seen innovations in Khan Academy where kids can learn bite-sized chunks of 5 to 15 minutes worth of content and be tested on it, and if they don't learn it or test themselves on it, and they can go back. It's more adaptable to the requirements of learning. It's more helpful for the child. It gives the child more choice because there are lots of online courses out there, tens of thousands of them, and it's more scalable. We don't need as many people to teach a large group of young people as we used to.
In all of these new innovations in education or whatever, not all of them are going to work, but the markets provide, I think, a pretty effective filtering mechanism over time. When people are allowed to choose, they gravitate towards what works and what doesn't. Well, unfortunately, they did go out of business, but that just releases those resources available to be used in some other way. So,
yes, one of the things that I think is overlooked about online learning is how much more choice it offers people. If your son or daughter is interested in some unusual sport or historical period, there's so many resources available now that chances are they can find a course that will deal with that.
yeah.
And foreign language, we see that being cut back, and yet there are tens of thousands of foreign language options available online that if we can just empower people to choose from and benefit from, it'll hugely advance learning, education, society.
That's very interesting, and we are out of time, John, so I appreciate you coming by to be on Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you.
Look forward to speaking with you again
Likewise.
in the future.
Thanks so much.
That's all again for Wichita Liberty TV this week. I'm Bob Weeks.